ago, we celebrated the groundbreaking of Peninsula Phase 1. We're here today for your preliminary review of Phase 2, consisting of residential, commercial, community facilities, as well as a plaza and a parking garage. Your presenters today are Claire Weiss, WXY, Victor Bobby Lawson Architects, and Elizabeth Kennedy Landscape Architects. We will jump right in as soon as I get this. There we go. So we're happy to be here. We understand these presentations should be short. Some of you may not have seen the context, so I'm going to quickly go through that. And then Victor and I will go through the architecture, and in the last section, Elizabeth, Kennedy Landscape Architect, will go through the landscape. So Phase 2 is outlined in red. The project is in 3 phases. It's located really kind of very close to the high point of Hunts Point. This is really a very hilly site, noticeably. And you can see that very clearly in the photograph. So if we're right there, we're looking, and I'm going to show you some of the demolition photographs too. But basically this was a jail, Spofford fenced, the signs of that are still there. And it has on the upper end of it, the community center, and on the lower end of it, an industrial area on Tiffany. So here we're looking at what is a city-owned pocket park across at what was the jail. It's now demolished, across Tiffany Street, and below from Burnett Place, again that spot, looking at higher part of Tiffany at the Monastery Wall. I think this is a helpful view because now you're on top of the site and able to see the demolition and looking again down the hill towards the rest of the Bronx. And then number 6, I'm looking really south, that's lower, again over, you can kind of see what the view is towards south, towards Manhattan. And these are from the construction crane overall views. And then just on Spofford and Tiffany, which is view 7, this is kind of the corner. Spofford was named after Spofford Avenue. Tiffany, this is sort of the main corner of the site. All right, before I hand off on plans to Victor, Phase 2 is in yellow. This really shows you from kind of Monida down to Tiffany is the major slope. But across Tiffany at the very bottom, the Monastery and Spofford, relatively flat. And up, and there's a recreation center at the top of the hill too. And this was the plan that we presented before. Phase 1 is under construction. The major elements of it are still there. There's Phase 2. You can see really it's really most of the landscape in the project is in Phase 2. All of the parking in the project is also in Phase 2. So it has kind of more complexity. This is the kind of plan that we're presenting today, the landscape plan. And so there's a kind of a level of resolution now on which Victor will go over, how to deal with both parking and the landscape at the same time. We also just wanted to review quickly what the shadow says before I hand this off, in that the goal was through all seasons, okay, summer solstice, winter solstice, and equinox, to really get light in the center of the landscape. And even though there is a certain, and by the use of twisting, building 2B, actually minimize the shadows on the landscape. Okay, Victor.
Thank you. As Claire said, the plans have literally stayed the same as was originally presented. Yes, beautiful. So essentially the entry off of Barretto Street into a grand entrance plaza. At that point, you've got your 90-foot diameter turnaround, which is allowing you to get into 2B, which is what we are calling the Lantern Building, is essentially entered from this point. So what we did here was to resolve entrances and site strategies, particularly particularly how one also gets into the large plaza. The entry actually show you that this is entry into the parking garage, which would with a ramp that goes down, and the parking garage is located beneath the plaza and part of as you can see, this is a ramp that goes down into the parking garage, which is located here. Essentially, there's the base of the building is going to be the Peninsula, I think, school that used to be at the site, and this is a community facility. The entry into 2A would be here. This is the cellar floor, and essentially, again, entry into 2B is at this point. Entry into 2A is at that point. You go into a core that then takes you up into the rest of the building. Entering here takes you to a core that takes you to the rest of the building. Essentially, these are typical floor plans and a roof plan with solar panels on them. As we said earlier, this is the large entrance driveway. Section through the building essentially shows that 1B, which is under construction, is slightly lower because this is Tiffany Street, and 2A, which is higher, but at the same time the buildings both sort of contextually cap off at the roof level. Again, this is the parking, which is going to be on 2 levels, which I showed you the entry from this point, and that's a parking garage. And now we'd like to talk about materials and
Yeah, so Victor and I are going to tag team on this, but you can really see the issues with the stepping down. So the goal in the elevations, which will probably be clearer as we zoom into it, is that we have 2 buildings overall in the master plan. The landscape, the intention of the landscape really knits it together, but that each of the buildings, except for 2B, which is the parallelogram, or we call it the pivot building, is distinctive. The other ones really are a family of brick buildings that we hope won't match, but they will be synthetic to one another. And the 2A building is the largest out of all the buildings. So the strategy was really to kind of try and break it into pieces and to not have it look like one long slab. And therefore there are 2, I'm going to, you can see the 2 together, but it's easier to explain in this slide. That 2A essentially is an L-shaped building, but the goal is that the 2 pieces actually have a different strategy about them. 3, obviously, in the future, the idea is that it also has another strategy relative to texture of brick and scale. And 2B, the goal in the original, which I'll show you, was that it kind of is sculptural, that it has a kind of almost, Hudson Point also has a certain amount of stone on their buildings, like the masonry. It has a sort of cliff-like, it has a softer quality. It doesn't look like a brick building, and it's different shaped and lighter in color. So
the other thing too, just go back to that for a second, is that these are ground buildings, although they're very serious buildings. The idea is to make them wall buildings, almost like a background for these 2 buildings, 1A, which is pivotal at the corner of Spofford and Tiffany Street. And this building is low to let light into the, and as Claire said, and that now becomes some kind of a...
So in the main, so we had this before, and this was kind of representing where we're at. We didn't, I'm going to add, so, again, we're in the beginning of this process. In terms of the plans are very set in terms of numbers, but we're trying to, that we looked at a kind of adding terracotta to one of the buildings with this gray grid, and so that 2A feels like 2 pieces, essentially, with the in between, and that we look at an all GFRC. So I want to talk just about the GFRC, which this is pre-cast that we submitted before, and GFRC. So this is still at the beginning of, the idea is that it really has a slightly sparkly, but yet enough black and aggregate in it that over time it's going to look great. That has a sort of classic idea. And that in that there's a lot of pressure obviously on units and windows and those, but that because the parking lot and the foundations, it became pretty clear to us that we needed a light enough building, and so that but that actually opened the opportunity to create a GFRC panel that could be very different in brick, that could have a vertical grain instead of the naturally horizontal or grid-like grains of the brick.
Light enough in terms of color
Oh.
and also in terms of the structure.
It's right, in terms of just literally the weight of
The weight
it,
of it.
to get enough. So there is, so this is the kind of looking at essentially one panel for the whole thing, but the panel has variations, and there's clearly, you know, ways to kind of look at depth and maybe varying the panel a bit. But right now we're presenting the idea of an all GFRC because we think instead of having a metal panel like this, which was what we had before, you could achieve it in the GFRC. So there's the brick, and the brick again is this idea of, I'm going to show on the facades, having kind of more of a red brick, but actually getting the highlights in the brick by putting randomly this iron spot that's in the piece that looks all brick, would be a kind of matte, shiny idea. And in the piece that, with a base, and in the piece with the terracotta, you wouldn't have this, but you have a terracotta that matches the base, kind of grid that goes with it. So that's the two ideas. I just want to show so that the back up of the L gets the terracotta infill, and the other arm is what I call the randomly shiny and matte brick idea. And then the parallelogram tower has a dark base, again, stone-like, and then this idea of, and then you can see it really clearly here, and you can see a kind of fleck in the brick. It's very hard to render that. But that's basically the back tower. And then, and you can really see the two here. So the difference between that base. And now on the 2B tower. So you can kind of see that we really looked at creating this sort of, I call it escarpment idea, but softer. And that the metal panels also would be lighter in color. So this has a kind of lighter tonality, and this has the back to the dark windows, but with the brick.
Metal panels underneath the
Right.
windows. The other thing too that we wanted to do is to emphasize the verticality of the building as opposed to the other buildings which are somewhat
So I think you get the idea. And I'm just going to pass off to Elizabeth.
Very quickly, what we were trying to do, you can see that there's been considerable advancement in the landscape concept over really the master plan idea. And we had several goals in doing this. One essentially was to accommodate 20 feet of grade change total without incorporating any railings or any ramps throughout the design. The second was sort of philosophically to be able to take advantage of the Bronx as a borough in the site and to introduce so much of the nature that you find elsewhere on in the natural places in the Bronx, to bring that as an expression of sort of what would be uncovered in this site. And what we have is an opportunity to look at the juxtaposition of a natural system and a man-made system, which is this portion of the courtyard and system is really a very substantial green roof. So what we have done since that time is really change the materiality of the step street here so that it is far more green. We've expanded on the planting bedding in the entry court, in part to disguise part of the parking garage that actually is above grade. All of these beds actually are flush at the edges with the paving, except for this bed, which is an express bed. We've enlarged the fountain area, but also included it in the geometry geometry of the bedding so that it feels as one design. We've extended the scoring pattern here, which sort of picks up on the pivot of Building 2B and some other rooftop textures into the Muse, which is an entirely hardscaped area. We've expanded on play, and I apologize, play equipment should not be there, but an area that is fully accessible at grade, a turfed, actually an artificial turfed area. We've aligned the paths and the ramps so that when you turn in off of Spofford, there's a sense of sweep all the way into the site. And we have strengthened the programming in this area so that between the fountain area and the stadium seating, there's a larger area for enactment. This circulation diagram just explains how this is universally accessible to all people. We have bicycle circulation that will come in off of Spofford. It's fed by bike lanes on Tiffany Street and on Hunts Point Avenue. We project that people will be able to come straight in off the Muse and park bikes in this area. We've also designated an area in here for what we're calling a stroller hitch, which is where people can tie up their strollers as they drop off for the ACS DOE facility. Otherwise, the circulation is diagrammed pretty strongly. The only area that's dashed is the area where we do have steps. Again, picking up on the motifs of how we can express naturally and in a man-made way the materials of the Bronx and the site. We're looking at exposed bedrock throughout the borough, ideas of using jetty stone, stacked bluestone, extending that into the terracing, of a language of terracing, and continuing from phase one, the material palette. Similarly, the idea of pin mounting stone in such a way that there's both a delicacy and a playfulness, and an introduction of yet another vocabulary into the site. Right around the corner here is this fountain, and we're very fortunate to find that not only is there an interlocking paver system that exists, it also has the diagonal that we have expressed elsewhere in the scoring design. Just some other elements: seating, illuminated handrails where we have handrails, very simple forms in terms of illuminated safety bollards, and that would be extended all the way through to the bike racks and stroller hitches. Texturally, in terms of what we wanted to do with planting, where there was deep shade or where there was an aggregate of planting, we wanted to refer to the Bronx, but also keep the canopies light, so we're looking at two native trees, Gladitsia and Kentucky coffee tree, and understory planting. Again, and where we have exposed areas, we have grass textures. So those are the two sort of simple palettes that we're going with. We've also tucked into this corner artificial turf because there's a desire to minimize ongoing maintenance where we do want people to have access to them. Some other features along the north facade of Building 2B, we're showing a wire trellis, and we just illustrated what that system would be like when installed there. And I believe this is the conclusion. This is the older overall view.
Yeah, and this view is adjusted to what the new, new rendering. And then there's some other view. This is an earlier view, streetscape, and this is a kind of
an early study.
An early study, because the wall is lower, and this is more like it, I think.
The idea of getting greenness and lushness in this space, while still maintaining an urban presence.
That's it.
Sure. Great. So thank you guys very much. I really appreciate all of the care that you're giving to this project and the detail and thoughtfulness to this site, which is, it's a pretty great site.
It's in the
Pretty great site. And the building on the corner of 1A, is that 1A?
Yeah.
1A.
It's very successful.
Right.
And I also appreciate the strategy about trying to create difference among the buildings so that you have different materials on, from 1A, 1B, and onward. But I guess I'm concerned. I guess my worry is cost-cutting thing going on in the background here, just to be blunt. Because I'm worried about, there's a reduction of glass in 2B and, what the heck, central plan again, is it 2B and 2?
Could you go back to,
2A and
the one
2B.
in the back.
2A and 2B.
could you go
Yeah,
back
let's go
to,
back
like,
to-
You had the.
there was a before and after
Yeah,
slide.
comparison ones,
Yeah, I'm going back to it.
Like 29 or 30 maybe.
Right.
Hold on.
So there,
So
so
where
2A and
was it
2B,
before?
so 2A,
That's true.
you know, I really,
Like go
think
back
those
and forth to the
elevations
next
are
slide.
working, you know, you've got the glazing, you're trying to get the extensive, I know it's early,
Mhm.
right, it's early, you're studying it,
Yes, yes.
but, you know, just somebody, because my antenna go up, you know.
No, this is
again,
the,
I'm worried,
this is the
you know,
perfect time to.
I'm worried that somebody's like, on the big one, they're worried about budget, somebody, and so we're getting, when we go to the next slide,
Yeah, and
on
these
2B,
are.
and then on 2A, we get less windows, number
Yeah.
one, right?
Yeah.
Less size of windows, dimension of windows, and we've really kind of, I don't know what word to use, it's become very streamlined on 2B, and, I mean, I think that GFRC could be, you could work with it, I'm just worried about I'm not convinced that the verticality expression, the expression of verticality is working for you here. So, I mean, I would just, you're in concept, where are we on this?
We're the middle of
Design.
DD here and towards the end of DD on there.
Okay. Oh, yeah, so,
Right,
I'm
but
just concerned that I'm not getting what I thought I was going to get.
in terms of the glass, I think that the realities of, it's not just the width, it's really getting glass to go. I don't think it's a cost issue on the structure or the GFRC, because there's parking below, and these are not, you know, this one's not a block and plank building. So there, you do have a certain amount of freedom. The real issue is getting the number of units in. And in general, you could do spandrel glass, but in general, the kind of keeping the glass to a certain height rather than having it go all the way down. And from a kind of energy point of view, we were trying to see how do we, and again, I think you, on this, could absolutely get in and out and staggering in the GFRC, and so it could be a bit more like that. But, and you could move mullions, it's really hard with the layouts we have to move windows around a lot. And I would say, it's absolutely right, probably the impression of that has more glass than we have right now. But I would say that between the terracotta, and again, out of phase one, we had a lot of complexity in the texture of the brick. And I think we were seeing costs that were really high, so we said to ourselves, okay, can we achieve complexity out of finish and texture and out of adding terracotta instead of only brick pattern? And that's really, but again, part of it was, these are even bigger buildings, they have more expensive foundation systems, so knowing they were going to have that, we really were trying to kind of work with the art of the possible, but at the same time, the client team that supported keeping the shape of the building and has supported GFRC or precast, but I think GFRC actually gives us more flexibility in terms of changing things and less heaviness.
Also in terms of cost, GFRC is obviously much more expensive than brick. What we're trying to do is to balance this so that we can still get the affordability in the project, but at the same time make it special. So the idea was to try to make it as simple as possible by having these GFRC and metal panels, so you get the sense that these are actual strips. But the idea about making load glass is one that we could go back and
Well, and also getting
Make it-
more
make it-
staggering in it.
Didn't you have another light there when I zoom in on the window?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying is,
Right.
this is the big difference.
Right,
you
but
see.
also on 2B, if I.
And you have another
I
window.
mean, those were going to have like tax or anything, or no?
Yeah,
No
but-
peanuts.
No
No
tax,
peanuts.
right? Right, so that was
So you
actual
have a
light.
second
Yeah.
light,
Yeah.
also on 2B, if I'm not mistaken, if I zoom in.
See,
Yeah.
to be, you have this window,
Which we,
and these are.
we have, but it, you know, it's still probably shorter than what originally we had there in terms of it coming right down to the floor as opposed to
So,
the,
can you go forward to the next slide?
Yep.
'Cause I think especially with the taller buildings, the complete uniformity, this,
Right.
as you mentioned, is the largest building on the site. It's the first thing
Yeah,
that
this
people
one is.
encounter, and it's incredibly uniform for a building of this scale in this neighborhood. I think that variation is something that
I mean, I'm all for
Really
minimalism,
impressive.
but I think it's, you know, the total expression of those vertical lines and then the sacrifice, I don't know how we have to sacrifice or why that extra light of window on the bottom here,
yeah.
when I zoom in.
It's,
Since we don't have a
the two separate issues.
I mean, it's great you don't have a P-tax system,
No,
right?
no.
Yes,
These are VRS.
I think,
Yeah.
I mean, I think this is the perfect moment just to hear that, because in a way, we kind of went to, what's the simplest read we could do and kind of decrease complexity. But I think it's, you know, except for the exploring the longer window or having glass, I think the other ones are not a cost issue. It's like, I think we can create a little bit more of the escarpment effect with the system we have
I mean, it doesn't
without
have to be all
using.
jiggy-jaggy, but I think light
Just
is
some
one of the
amount
great
of-
things
Right.
that we want to have in apartments.
Yeah, one thing that
In the
is
city.
Is
We can't ever get
working,
enough.
Very true.
one thing, yeah, so the idea of how much natural light and increasing the windows. I think
Are
we
you
can
doing
study.
that 40, 60, you try to, I mean, you're not going for net zero, so.
No, but
No, no.
but in the, right now, ComCheck and stuff is just so challenging that you are better off erring on the as much wall as possible.
But these are facing south.
They are.
This,
facing
well,
south.
all
The-
directions,
Yeah.
2A's back is north and obviously the front
Yeah.
is also.
which is nice, we're getting a certain amount of the geofRC depth in it
Right.
too.
Yeah,
And
and
you can
the-
get more depth by doing a little bit more.
I thought the views you showed us from the site construction were great, so we could see what people will be able to see.
Yes,
Which is
Yeah.
fantastic.
No, there's going to be.
So I just will fight for the light and windows.
Okay,
And
more,
then the grid.
more glass.
Yes.
The super grid.
The
Oh, the
terracotta.
super grid.
Okay.
Yeah, you didn't go into the super grid too much. Did we see a whole elevation of this?
Yeah, let
We
me,
just get a piece of it there.
but I can look back on our previous elevations, actually, the flat elevations, you
Did
can
we
see
get a
it.
little elevation? rendering?
Here also. There,
That's it?
that's the flat on straight elevation.
When you're trying, it's kind of looking at a, kind of a warehouse.
Yeah, it has slightly, and some of it exactly was this mixing up between
Yeah.
the Banknote building, the warehouse stuff, and,
I mean, I'm really for bigger windows any which way.
okay.
And I think if we can see it, I think seeing your rendering at the end was great, of the landscape presented, you know. But now we can see the buildings
Okay.
as they are,
Okay.
as you start to maybe refine the bigger windows,
Yeah.
we could see them. You know,
Okay.
that view would be extremely helpful, to see those bigger windows in there.
Okay.
Elizabeth, I'm a little, I saw like two different site plans. Can you just explain? There was one at the beginning, and then there was one that you showed. I'm assuming the one that you showed, that this is the current site plan?
Yes, this is the advance to DD
Okay.
at this time. The very first one that we showed were at the ULURP stage. It's
Okay.
really some massing and
Okay. So, that's good, because there was something kind of a little too relentless about how you ascended or descended grade. And so I think this is an absolute improvement on that. The one thing, how wide are some of those entry paths coming off of Spofford?
8 feet, 16 feet, 8 feet, 8 feet through here. So we didn't do anything less than 8 feet.
And you mentioned something about trying to disguise a view of the parking.
subject of the parking garage is slightly above grade here. So all of these planters actually have a flush edge, but this planter has a raised edge with a built-in seat because we absorbed that edge. Yeah. That was the only place that we wanted to do that.
So, thank you for those shadow studies. It certainly does reveal that some of your major gathering spaces will be in more light than in less light. Can you just speak a little bit more about the idea of the interactive fountain or the on-off fountain?
Sure.
Because the example you showed is the one at Beekman,
Yes.
which frankly to me looks like an irrigation system burst. It's a really dope fountain.
Okay. What we're showing here are 4 boulders in concept. We probably will not be able to find those same boulders, but we think that we can do a precast with stratifications of concrete that could suggest the minerality of that element and reduce the load on the pin. So that would be a man-made object, but they would be these 4 rounded forms, and only in this area would we have the jet fountains, and they would just be bubbling at that level. And they're bubbling very low. Let's see if I can, we used to be,
And the reason for that is why they bubble low?
as opposed to bubbling high.
Yes.
Well, in our mind, it could, the whole plaza could be somewhat quiet because it's really a hardened space. There's nothing in the system that doesn't prevent us from being able to specify a pump and water supply that could accommodate a higher jet. Obviously, there's wind spray. We're not that far from the East River and the Sound. So part of it was just maintenance. Part of it was just aesthetic. That was it. But it can be higher. I mean, there's nothing preventing that. We didn't think of a fine spray, for instance, or misting or anything like that.
Well, there's no other place, but there's the one park, Hunts Point Riverside, has some interactive kid jets, but there's no other place where there's really playful water. And it would just seem to me that having that as an opportunity, it may not be the kind of always mode, but having it as a more interactive fountain, because right now when I go to Beekman, it really does look like it's a leak. It just does not,
Doesn't
you
speak
don't
to
know whether you
it.
walk through it, you
Yeah.
avoid it. It's not a compelling fountain.
I hear you. I mean, there are certainly systems that, once they're engaged a certain way, that, you know, the jets come up at different intervals, and even there are sensors that are responsive to movement. So we can consider all of that in the development. The technology is pretty much the same. It's just really the pump and the sensors and the time.
Right, and whether you want, I mean, because you only can use whatever it is, 7 gallons a minute or something, so, and how you're going to circulate it, whatever. Anyway, that is, I would say, my major concern about that part of the space. And then I think just, you know, thinking through how you're going to protect some of these flush edges against dogs or people running through it, and just integrating that maintenance reality into sort of the next level.
Next level of detail.
Yeah.
We've been having those debates in the office as we speak, yeah.
I think it's a good.
Thank you.
Very nice.
Thank you. I will tell the team.
Good luck making it happen.
Anyone else would like to?
I just wondered, is the step straight, or is it an existing?
I'll turn back to just this slide so it doesn't have the.
None of this exists. This is
All of this is
So
new
that you are
construction.
building a step.
Yeah, all of this is new construction.
And ADA accessible step street, which does
That's
not
right.
exist anywhere else.
I was wondering, because you know the step streets of the Bronx, there's so much.
There's,
Difficult.
and this is our opportunity to say that the trend to rising ratio here is not 6 to 12 or 5 to 14. So it's far more gradual, it's much more easily climbed. Somebody like me will not look for the elevator. This was key for those of us who have to use the elliptical rather than the tread machine. It's good on the joints.
I'm excited about creating a new step street, and it doesn't have the Joker. I gather my students set out to analyze why the movie, I knew nothing about it, but why the movie used the Joker at a particular step street in the Bronx, and now there are tourists coming to what has been an ordinary, but this is very exciting and innovative.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you. It was a team effort. It was definitely.
I did have one, you mentioned that the paving
Mhm.
is a continuation of phase one,
Yes.
so that acid edge is being used in phase
The
one?
acid etch is being used for all flat surfacing,
Okay,
and then the high-performance precast concrete is for all of the treads and risers. And we're looking at also building the landscape risers out of that material as well, just as a difference.
and thank you for the stroller parking. Is it by the door?
It's not too far from the door. It's in this vicinity here.
Right.
And so it's like bike rack, stroller hitch. They're all the same.
And where's the door?
The doors are here.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
This would be.
I thought they
Yeah,
were
so you
around.
can see them, sorry, we've done a kind of diagonal door entrance, and it's covered here, because the building above comes there, so this is the pre-K, and that's the residential. That's great. Which we think both populations will be using the pre-K.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Public meeting is now commenced with the consent agenda. And items number 27247 to 27273 are what we're reviewing today. Please note the conditions of approval as recommended by the various committees and the recusals. Staff has noted Commissioner Aaron's recusal from item 27265, Commissioner Hawkinson's recusal from items 27247 and 27251, and my recusal from item 27271. Are there any other recusals or abstentions or no votes that we should know? No, let the record show there are no other recusals, abstentions, or no votes. Will someone make a motion to approve the consent agenda?